the world is moving so fast, people are so busy.
Mm.
And as soon as you kind of like run out their energy or run out their attention, it's really hard to convince people to give you more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Experience, where we give you an inside look behind the top product-led experience. Each week, we'll give you UX examples, proven strategies, and hard-earned lessons from experts. And today, this is your co-host, Ramley John. My other co-host, Lila, is on vacation. Today, I have Allen. He is from Lucid, a visual collaboration suite of apps, including Lucidchart, Lucid Spark, Lucid Scale. I was introduced to him by Andrew Kaplan, and we just had him on one of the episodes for Behind the Experience. Allen is the former group product manager at Lucid, where he's been there for 4 years and more. He's worked problems across the funnel, from engagement to retention to product virality. How's it going, Allen? I'm excited to be chatting here with you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. I know you contributed to the course we have at the Value First Onboarding, and one of the things that you really said was that when it comes to product growth and user engagement, user onboarding is such an important lever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we really want to drive this point home, and you shared a few really key insights in that video that you shared for that course.
Yeah, so a lot of company, especially in the SaaS world, like everyone cares about engagement and retention. Lucid is not exception, right? When we first start, it's the same thing. Then what we realize as we dive into data and figure things out, we realize like a lot of retention or engagement problem are actually onboarding issues, right? Like people weren't really onboarded to your product. They weren't really understanding what your product is about, and like get into those habit loop or aha moment, however you want to call it, and then resulted in a long term, it looks like, oh, your product is not engaged. Oh, your user don't retain well. But ultimately, everything starts with onboarding.
Makes a ton of sense. I really love that you mentioned there that everything starts off with user onboarding. It really does make an outsized impact. I checked out a few other episodes that you've been on. I know you've been on Heads Up podcast, as well as a few other ones. You really have an interesting insight into what an engaged user is for Lucid, because often this becomes a sticky point for a lot of products. Because if you don't know what an engaged user is, then you might be driving the wrong kind of users into your product. Can you talk a little bit about engaged user and what it is for the products that you've been working on at Lucid?
Yeah. So for engaged user, I'm a very analytical and like data driven person. And when I was doing this, I had to learn to figure out like the engaged user definition often is a combination of both qualitative and quantitative data, right? Like most company today, we all have more data than we can personally consume. So like usually is also where people started. When we look at it, we basically have the approach is like, okay, cool, let's see who are very engaged based on the data in terms of frequency or the usage, the depth or breadth. Then we also look at, hey, what's our company strategy for our product? Like, what kind of people do we want to serve? With Lucid, we have millions and millions of users, and we have a very broad use case, but we don't serve everyone in the same degree, right? Certain type of persona use case, we serve it really well. Some of them is more tangent. So when we look at engagement, like basically is looking at the data to figure out who are those people, pairing that with a product strategy and value proposition, and do a lot of user call, user research to validate those things. Over time, like when we first started, it was a very high level definition 4 years ago, talking about like, oh, just people creating and finishing their document. Like that was it, like super simple, no secret.
Yeah.
And then over time, as we obviously the product developed more, the market is changing, competition are changing. We also start to serve more particular use case and persona. Then we start to expand that engaged user definition. And now we have different teams and different products working for particular engaged user. And those things are keep being reevaluated, keep being updated. I would say like on a quarter to 6 month basis, like every time we rethink about our OKR, rethink about our product, and positioning, like those engaged user definition will just keep being renewed as we learn more.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, it's the definition of engaged user depends on the product, but also depends on the type of user. Can you give an example? Like, for example, I'm sure there's several use cases for Lucid. Like, is there a particular example you can give where, like, for this type of user, here's the set of actions that we would call, and like you mentioned, it changes all the time, but like just maybe a snapshot of one that you've heard in the past, like of an example of an engaged user, so that people can have can hear like, okay, this is what they're driving towards building for what an engaged definition for an engaged user for their product.
Yeah. So, for example, Lucidchart has a lot of user who does technical documentation, right? Like a lot of engineering, cloud infrastructure, architect, they all use Lucidchart to document down like UML diagram or like their sequence diagram and showing how their server and all those things talk together. So when we decided this is a persona we want, we start to see, okay, cool, what are the core type of action they are doing? And then what's the nature frequency of them doing these kind of things? Because no one's going to brush their teeth more than twice a day. Well, some people might do, but like for majority, they don't. So like when we talk to them, it's very critical to understand like, hey, how often do you need to create more? How often do you review? How often do you kind of update things? And once we get those frequency and then those core actions, so for them, like they probably have a new project every quarter. And then once they start it will be a very intensive time period. They work on it every single day to get it to a polished state. And then they will share with their manager, their peers to make sure things are good. And then they update that diagram or refer to that diagram like in a weekly to bi-weekly use case. Right? Like, oh, I will look at it, or like we'll talk about it, discuss in these regular meetings, and then pull it out. So a lot of those like particular metrics are around these kind of actions as the baseline, right? It's always around like certain action within certain amount of time, and we look how many people actually perform in those weekly or bi-weekly cadence and keep doing those actions. So I can dive deeper, but like I think that's just a high level view how we approach and like a more accurate example.
That makes I just laugh when you said nobody brushes their teeth more than time. I know a few people that does it four times a day. I was like, wow, that's a little too much. But you're right. Your engaged metric should be driven by behavior, right? Like when you're trying to growth hack somebody to try to maximize their teeth brushing per day. That doesn't follow behavior. Versus it's the same thing with creating those diagrams, like trying to force somebody to make more than they need to for their work is actually counterproductive than it is productive for that. I really love the discussion around frequency there. I want to talk a little bit about you working with other teams. I know when it comes to user onboarding or working on virality or any kind of growth or product related, working with other teams like marketing or customer success or support is super, super important. And I always love to hear how other people work with other teams, especially to drive growth and drive really the results that they have. Can you talk a little bit about like how you in your team, your former team at Lucid works with other teams to achieve those goals that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that has been one of the very interesting thing I've been doing at Lucid in a way. When I joined Lucid, we were about like 200 plus people. When I left, we're over 1,000. So we gone through that, growing stage in the company, and a lot of things going from like, oh, I know everyone knows who Allen is, to like, man, I don't even know half of
who's Allen.
Like, who's Allen? And like, are you new? Something. So when I think about working with other teams, there are two buckets in my mind, right? Like one within product engineering org, one is outside of product engineering work with like marketing support and all those things you talk about. So the first one, I have very regular one-on-one and checking with all the product director across different areas. And, my directs will report to me on what they're doing, and same thing for them. So we coordinate on our level to figure out like, hey, what are the things we need help? What are the OKR we're hitting? And like kind of collaborate there. We also have a lot of those like regular checking for people to share learning, share those things they are doing for the company. Outside of that, like not just those like regular meeting and checking on a personal level, my teams also be viewed as kind of a center of excellence when it comes to engagement, running A/B tests, and thinking through metrics, things like that. So we do a lot of lunch and learn. We do office hour to help other product managers to think through it. On a tactical level, right? Like my team's OKR is always centered around top line company level metrics. A lot of other teams will contribute to it as well, but there, it's probably a combination of like delivering new feature, fulfilling certain use case, and then with the eye on increasing engagement. So a lot of time we work with them in the way like, if this is a new initiative like virality, we will take it and then we are going to do it for a quarter or two and figuring out everything and like kind of creating a playbook or a template or process for people to know, hey, these are the couple area and levers that will be super helpful. Then as we have new and harder metrics to take, we take on those and we start to transition learning and those areas to individual product teams outside of my team. So that's how we work with, product engineering. Outside of that, with customer success, support, product marketing, we have program teams at Lucid, right? Like all those program teams are sponsored by executive in the company, and some of them are around, user education, creating community, all those things. And I will be sitting in those program teams as kind of a bridge from the product side and these other cross-functional teams. In that process, I help them to see like, hey, if this is the Tableau dashboard the CEO is looking at, and all this education or whatever webinar initiative are going to increase user engagement in our community, all those things, how do you think about those metrics, right? Because like in our industry today, engagement, retention, virality, these are kind of a fancy word people threw around. It's like, oh yeah, like as long as you attach like product growth to your initiative, you get a budget type of thing. Is that real? Or like maybe in your mind it is, but like, does that really affect the top line, right? Like we might be doing so many things, but at the end of the day, like the board, the investor, the executive, they want to see metrics and impact to show people. So my role there, a lot of times, like helping to think through things, and also like a lot of things can just be a silo, right? Like if your email marketing is a silo, then your product, then user is going to have a weird experience. It's like, oh, your email is saying this, and you drop me here in the product,
right,
but products are not showing this. So like I spend a lot of time coordinating with these cross-functional teams to figure out like how to think about this holistically all together, and also bridge that experience between these different teams to the product.
It makes a ton of sense. I love that. I really love that whole discussion you have there. You talked about lunch and learn, so I really love that as well. I think it's all about sharing knowledge with that as well. I want to next jump into a few screens with Lucidchart, particularly around their onboarding, around some of the work you and your team has done. I'm going to share my screen here, and for people who are tuning in via audio on the podcast, it says here there's when after somebody signs up for Lucidchart, they fill out their email, password, I believe, also the name, they sign up. This is loading screen, and I love it because when we chatted before we recorded, Allen, you talked about how this is non-intrusive education. It says here, pro tip: open the Shape Library Manager by pressing the M key. Can you talk a little bit about this loading screen for Lucidchart?
Yeah, so we are trying to do a lot of things to help our user and want to make sure the user can have success and momentum in our product ASAP. So in this whole journey, we made a few mistakes in the past, right? Like we trying to like through education to people's face and say, these are 10 things you must know about Lucidchart. That will make you extremely successful. For some people it works, right? Like for my grandma or my mom, like, they love it, right? Like But for most like knowledge worker these days, we are pretty
Yeah, right.
familiar with technology.
Hmm.
Like when we talk to users, some people feel offended. They feel like, you think this is
Interesting.
dumb? Like I can't do things or I can't learn myself. Like this is so easy. Why are you telling me like maybe your toy is for dummies, like not for me? Right? So like we have been getting some very spicy feedback or like tweets. So the thing my team have been striving to do is to like figuring out like how to teach and educate people in a non-intrusive way, to make sure like, hey, these are going to be super helpful and people are willing to try it, but don't make them feel they are dumb or like stop them from what they are trying to get. And especially in the onboarding journey is extremely critical, right? Because people coming usually from Google search or SEO or whatever other channel, and they have something in mind. They want a value they are looking for. So if you stop them and say, hey, look at this or like hear that, they are going to just be pissed and leave. So when we do these kind of like loading screen tooltips or I wouldn't call it onboarding, but like those like helpful education type of message, we use zero state that people have to be on this journey anyway, and you are just trying to be helpful along the way. Then people love it, right? Like a lot of people is like, oh, I found this super helpful, and like when they get in, they start trying things like, and it's like very low in terms of like their cognitive load. Like no one feels this is too heavy to take, but also this can be very helpful for a lot of people, and they start to see like, oh yeah, even me can use this product and very quickly. I think there's also a magic in shortcuts, right? Like anytime when I learn a new shortcut about my
Same.
Mac or any product, all of a sudden I feel, oh man, I know this better than other people. So helping people to adopting like shortcut or like these quick tips actually build up a lot more, like I would say, mental momentum than maybe the actual utility.
Interesting. I really love that whole discussion. I think we can do a whole episode on that. Can you talk a little bit about that interview? Like you said, you talked to a few users and they were offended. You said they were like so offended that you're like, oh, you think I'm so dumb? Did that really happen? Like,
Yeah,
with
that
y'all?
really happened. Like we talk to our user pretty regularly. Like at Lucid, we have all those mechanisms to recruit people, and some people love us. Some people kind of just like, I've been loving your product for a while, but you recently did this stupid thing and pissed me off. So and they're always coming from the angle is like, because I love you so much, I'm going to tell you this type of thing. And like I see on those calls and people just like, yeah, please stop doing this. Like this is so stupid. Like it's not for me. I don't need things like that.
That's really really funny. You mentioned that. I guess it's also finding. Can I know this is not part of the original questions I had shared with you, but I'm curious around how you find that balance. How you're finding that balance between being helpful and like pointing things around versus like now you're on the other end. Now it's like really annoying. Like what did you say? It's like your mom and grandma might like that, but like for knowledge workers, they were like be so offended that you were tweeting them that we're tweeting them so dumb. Really.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think there's a silver bullet in terms of like, oh, this is the right thing to do. Lucid is also still learning. But in general, I think about a couple things. Actually, three. First is the audience. Second is the context. And third is the method, channel, or pattern. Right? So like, I think a lot of time, in most part I've seen, the way they do it is they probably only thought about one of these things and just kind of threw something in their product instead of all three. Either it's like very helpful message, but like wrong audience, or it's like something that's really cool, but like you give it in a very annoying pattern that's just people just want to exit out whatever model or whatever things you show them. Or sometimes just like this is the right pattern, this is the right message, and you give it to someone who is like completely irrelevant to the message. So when we are doing any sort of promotion or tips or education, these are the three kind of aspects we look through to make sure, hey, we are really careful on what we show to people, because the attention is limited on our user, and like especially the world is moving so fast, people are so busy, and as soon as you kind of like run out their energy or run out their attention, it's really hard to convince people to give you more. So we always kind of err on the, you can say, more conservative side to start, and then we start to expand to, you know, different audience, different level of user, and different use case when we do these messages.
That's an awesome perspective there. We're gonna jump into in a little bit around templates. I really love how Lucidchart approaches that whole philosophy that you just talked about. But before we do, you know, for free users who sign up for free tier, in here you ask a few questions for users before they jump right in. There's a progress indicator at the top. You know, there's 3 things that you're asking for. First it says, welcome to your first document randomly. So I really like how personal it's already. What's your role? What best describes you? And then on the next screen, it asks, which marketing use case would you like to try first? So it's interesting that it updated that, because I selected marketing there. So then I'm guessing this updates based on the responses from the first questions. Is that right? Like this updates? Okay, interesting. Really good. Best case there. And best practice there is updating that. And then the very last is just invite your team members here. And then there's at the very bottom of this modal, there's a call to action, view templates, start diagramming, and previous. Can you talk a little bit about the work around this, like any kind of experiments you can share or any learnings with this welcome modal?
Yeah, so we have spent a lot of time and effort and resources on this journey, right? Like, and still revamping today. Like, this is something we review very regularly at Lucid. But in general, there are a couple like top level learning, I would say. First is like, we recognize, you know, every product will give users some friction, but there are good friction and bad frictions, right? Like the good friction will like make user more successful later on, and that's, you know, that's the trade-off we are willing to make. So if you look at this 3-step onboarding thing, is 3 is kind of like magic number in a lot of use cases. Like if you have more than 3, people start, oh, how many do you have? If you have fewer than 3, it's like usually you don't get something that's helpful,
100%.
or people also feel like, oh, this is not formal enough for whatever reason. Another thing is, when we are asking these questions, because Lucidchart today has millions and millions of users, and we serve a very wide range of different use cases. So user telling us who they are while they are doing actually help us better to kind of serve them and surface out whatever is relevant to what they are looking for. Because Lucid, like I said, like a lot of people coming in, they want one thing to start. But we can actually do many things for their workspace or their day-to-day. They just don't know. Instead of they have to like look around and like find 10 different products, like Lucid, we have a suite. We can just help them with all those things. So knowing who they are, especially self-identified, usually people are not super against that. Because now I think the expectation is like, oh, if I tell you this, it's obvious how my product experience will be better. So that's where we started. If you look at the later stat, it's about like, hey, what use case you have, and then like inviting your team and show templates. The things here is like, we recognize, especially since COVID, right? Like in collaboration, all those things are becoming so critical in any knowledge worker's day to day. So a lot of time, you know, like sharing permission or like figuring out which document I'm sharing with people is just annoying. Like, oh, you don't have access to it. Oh, let me go grab a link and like give you permission, whatever. So we have been evolving over time from that paradigm to now just like, hey, put people in your team. And then like, you know, there are a couple people on my team I work very closely with. Sure, they should have everything I have access to. So like in the future, as you know, I'm passing things around, they would never need to like request access or do all those things. So this is also like what we do here. Last thing about this is like, you know, people can just start right away to dive in, or they can view templates. Reason being, you know, like there are people who know what they want. They just need to like dump their thoughts into the canvas and start doing quick, cool things. There are also people who are exploring, right? Like a lot of people is like, I'm checking out product for my team. I'm trying to figure out whether this is right for me. Um, from our experience, template has been like a huge component in the decision making process and getting people inspiration. Like at Lucid, I think we have probably over 1,000 different templates.
Wow.
And then they're across different use cases, right? So like a lot of people know like, hey, I need to brainstorm with my team, or I need to create a process diagram, whatever. But they do not know more than just plain boxes and arrows. Like, well, through our template library and like what people are seeing in our community, they quickly understand, oh, I can make a very delightful experience for my team. This can look so great. And like, yeah, I'll be so proud if my manager and the whole company see this is from me and I produce all these things. So the template has been very helpful to serve our user in terms of like a good starting point, getting inspiration, or just like to validate whether this is the right product for them and for their team.
I love it. We'll jump into the templates a little bit. Before I do have a follow-up question around this one. The use case. It kind of brought to mind our discussion around engaged user. So I'm guessing like users self-selecting, self-identifying themselves kind of helps. Does it help? I'm guessing it does. It helps your team figure out like for this user's their engagement around flowchart versus like other things like org charts is probably different. Like I can't imagine somebody updating org charts that often unless they're hiring really, really quickly versus flowcharts. I might be updating it like every hour based on feedback. So the frequency is different. Is that what you're also your team is figuring out? Your former team is figuring out with this use cases here.
Yeah, this is super helpful for us. Like you said, like figuring out what people's use case and then what frequency or type of education we should serve to it, right? Like flowchart definitely, in some ways it's pretty straightforward boxes and arrows. And like helping people to create that in a very efficient way is great. Like you want people to do it ASAP, right? Like they can just feel like that success and building something. Org chart on the flip side, like you say, people don't create a new org chart for their company every day. They might update it periodically, but it's also a very, very high upfront manual effort if your company has hundreds of people to do. Then, we have integration with, let's say, Bamboo HR, or we have data linking ability. You can pull in a whole spreadsheet or CSV, and then all those data will turn into little cards of different people, and you can have their picture, their title, their pay, whatever you want. But we are not going to teach that to everyone. Like maybe there are only 1% of people coming to really do org chart, but that's a very important critical use case for a company. Then we do want to teach you about it. So like these are also ways for us to like say, hey, this is your use case. These are the best place for you to get started, and we can tailor the journey for user. We don't do it for every use case because we don't have that resources. But for the strategic one that we want to serve, we do things like that.
That's an interesting discussion around going back to value first onboarding. Is like it's like the whole concept of minimum viable onboarding or like just in time onboarding. Really, like you're teaching them what the minimum things they need to know to be successful with us. For org chart, they might need to learn how to upload a CSV and connect Bamboo HR, which is for a flowchart. Somebody who wants that, you don't teach. You might not necessarily show them how to upload a CSV at that moment because it's not relevant to them. So you're really like, okay, what is the minimum things this type of use case we need to educate a user to fully educate them? Is that something your team is active? Your former team is actively was thinking about the different use cases?
Yeah, we do. And also more than just my team, right? Like we have laid down a foundation for, the overall onboarding, but like the Lucidchart team, they are always like figuring out what kind of new feature they deliver and like they are strategic direction for, the product to be more intelligent, for the product to be smarter with data and things like that. And those are a lot of things they focus on to like expand those use case and help more people to adopt those kind of feature.
That makes a ton of sense. I want to jump to the very last screen here with the templates. I know you've been leading towards this. I'm super excited about this. I didn't know there's over 1,000 type of templates here. There's, for free people who sign up for the free trial, for the free tier, there's like premium templates. So this is for the free tier. When I signed up for it, there's like flowcharts, O charts. I selected one of the flowcharts here, and it gave me some options on the right to like some resources. This is a screen for the free tier. And then interestingly enough, for when I signed up for a free trial, I had to upload, add my credit card to access the free trial. But that gave me more access to different types of resources. I actually was welcome with a different modal with, view templates, watch a 90-second video about Lucidchart, and then I selected a different kind of thing. I believe this is an org chart where now there's different places I can go towards. Can you talk a little bit about templates in the context of Lucidchart? And you were already leading towards it, how it's unlocked many different types of activation moments and things like that for you there.
Yeah, so a couple things, and I think you see it in your experience, is like when you are a free user versus when you start a trial, meaning you have access to all features, the onboarding, they are slightly different. And this also kind of tied back to a value first thing, right? Like we fully recognize the product has a lot of feature, it has a full power of things for people to explore. But we also want to do it in the way that's consumable and also it doesn't block user in any way, right? Like there are a lot of premium feature, there are a lot of things. If a free user get to it, they are going to be hitting a paywall or block right away. And that's definitely not the ideal experience we want. Like even though we show different feature to people or like we show different depth or breadth, the core value proposition is the same, right? Like people can visualize their ideas on the canvas. So the onboarding and templates role here is just like figuring out what's the most efficient way to get there. You can see with the free user, like the template we surface up here is much, much more lightweight compared to the premium one. Reason being, we do have certain limitation on number of shapes or assets you can have on the canvas. Sure, we can put those like mega ones here and show you how amazing it will look, but we also don't want you to say like, oh, I have to pay right away, right? Like, and then the resources we put on here, they're also more lightweight because a lot of these people starting free, a lot of them can be students. They can be solo. Right? Like they might use a free email domain. It's not like the company has a formal budget for them to buy a product. They're just trying to figure something out for their own. And the use case is probably sometimes a little more straightforward and simple. So we want to give them enough for them to like keep going, to like start trying drag and drop certain things, adding a couple shape. And a lot of our activation moment are actually around those like things in terms of like, we believe when you're turning your ideas into reality or visualizing it, it has a lot of things to do with like how many shapes you have there, how do you connecting ideas through lines, and whether you edit things with certain formatting. So those are kind of like our thinking there. On the flip side, for people who kind of just say, hey, I'm starting a premium trial, I swipe my credit card for a trial, like there's also a higher level commitment for these people, right? Like credit card is not something I will give away to it. Like usually there's a certain level commitment I already give it to it. So obviously the flip side is like we want to meet that expectation, give the best and show them the full power. So you see the template solution here is a lot more. And there's also nothing to indicate like, oh, what's premium, what's not, right? Like we just like, you got a whole product. This is a full deal you're getting. So like just explore and do and try. The description or the help here, we still use that non-intrusive pattern, right? It's like a zero stay on the canvas instead of something on your face. But we also show them a little more granular stat, because it's an enterprise software as well, right? Like, so like we do want to show you like, hey, is very rigorous. There are a lot of capability. You don't need to use all of them, but like they are more than you can, there are more things than you need kind of feeling like. But we also want to do it in a non-super overwhelming way. So like it's a tricky balance to show the power of a product, but also make people feel like this is the product for you. Don't worry if you don't know everything. There should be enough for you type of feeling.
I love that. Like when somebody puts in their credit card, you're totally right. Like they're expecting a little bit more than that. When I signed up for this, full disclosure, I signed up for this. I put in my boss's credit card and then made sure to cancel right away because you're right. Like it's hard for my credit card is downstairs. You have to take it out of your wallet unless you have like a tool that like LastPass or 1Password that can enter that credit card number right away. But there's a lot of friction and you want to really meet that expectation with that. One of the follow-up questions I have here, I'm curious around any insights around like figuring out what shapes or what templates is premium versus free tier. I hear this discussion all the time around which feature should I give for free and which one should I hide behind a paywall. And I'm guessing you had a discussion at Lucid around that for templates or even for shapes as well.
Yeah. So to be honest, I think a lot of time there's more an art than science of this process, right? Because as a company, there are a lot of consideration in terms of like the sales side of things or like differentiator versus our competitor, everything. But I will say on the growth or product side, the high level principle is like, if your company strategy, for example, like Lucid, we have this like reverse trial freemium experience. So, and we are a product company. So like the whole core is like, you have to be okay that some people will just always be free and never pay you and use your services. That's totally fine. But there are also things we provide that's very valuable, like people should pay us for. So when we are thinking through paywall or like, any sort of limitation on feature or usage, we start from the points like, okay, cool. What's the core value proposition of our product? What do we want to provide user to? Like, what are the value we want to provide to user, to free user, to this kind of user? And then we say, okay, cool. If that's the case, these are the set of things we cannot put behind a paywall for everyone to experience that core value proposition. And then we also believe when people been doing this enough or more than a certain threshold, they should start paying. So like we have limitation around like number of shapes you can do there or number of documents you can edit, right? You can create how many you want, but like the active one number is limited. So there are a lot of things I think it aligns in terms of like usage-based charging, like those things are in our industry today. Just like we want to make sure we provide enough value for you. If we don't provide enough, don't pay. But if we provide more than certain threshold, then like you should pay us. And on top of those, like obviously with enterprise, there are security, all those things. That's kind of a different world than mine. But that's just how in the high level principle how we generally think through this.
I love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to start wrapping up. Just a couple more questions. One is, you share a lot of tips, actionable tips right now in the last 30 to 40 minutes that we've been chatting. If you had one or two final pieces of advice you'd like to share for people who are tuning in, they're the ones who are trying to improve their activation, their retention, maybe even their virality. What kind of tips would you give them with parting words of advice or advices that you have for people who are tuning in today?
Yeah, I think the most valuable advice I got when I started doing this is to really understand what's the input and what's the output, right? I think with our industry, right, like money, growth, or ARR, retention, like these numbers a lot of time represent how people talk about this all the time. So a lot of people, they have their eyes so fixed on these kind of things and want to drive those things out because like you get promotion, you get rewarded for like these metrics. But at the end of the day, we really need to understand what's the input that eventually will turn out to this output, right? Like the product won't grow if people are not engaged or if people don't love and use your product. You won't have virality if people don't perceive this is a viral product, or like if people don't perceive this is something they can do it with their team and it actually provide benefits and advantage for them. So, those are like the early mistake even myself made. Is like, oh, let's tweak something. Like, a lot of people talking about like growth hacking, change the color, change the button size, all those things. It can work to a certain degree, but ultimately, if you want to do something that's more sustainable, it's a long-term type of growth, you need to understand what's the input and keep putting effort into those input, and the output will show in a very outsized way eventually. But it also takes time.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Alan. I really do appreciate it. One final question. When can people find out more about you and your work online? And whether it's your LinkedIn or website or anything else like that, for people to follow up if they have any follow-up questions or just want to follow along with your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a personal website. I do have my LinkedIn, and so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with anyone and just chat more about this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Alan. I really do appreciate it.